Leon's eyes scanned the neon-filled alleyway for the 50th time that night, half expecting someone to jump out and confiscate the industrial crates he had stacked under the flickering LED sign. The sign itself, a swirling galaxy done in vibrant pink and azure neon tubes, read the Infinite Arcade. On the doors leading inside, there was an image of a stylized helmet superimposed over a glowing aura. 3 months ago, he had opened this place with high hopes of revolutionizing what people thought a spiritual experience could be. But never in his wildest dreams did he expect the uproar that would follow. Next to him, the phone in his pocket rattled with texts from the press. They wanted interviews, quick photo ops, something to headline the morning news. It all felt surreal, the kind of mania that signaled the birth of something bigger than he was prepared to handle. Yet the arcade had become an overnight phenomenon, drawing all sorts of curious souls. There were rumors that stepping inside meant you could find enlightenment as easily as slipping on a headset or sitting at a coin-operated game. It turned out people had been starving for something intangible, something profound to experience beyond the mundane cycles of life. Leon's face broke into a grin as he slid open the door. A swirl of incense and electronic hums greeted him. Here was his brainchild, an entire hall of games, some mainstream and recognized, like Journey or Abzu, and some exotic new titles that nobody had ever heard of, each carefully curated for their supposed ability to evoke transcendence or stir intangible presences in the hearts of players. He walked past the newly installed cluster of faux god helmets, each perched on a mannequin-like stand. Modeled after the original contraption that had once promised contact with invisible entities, these ones were just insulated headgear fitted with small sound machines playing white noise. Yet word had gotten out that, for many people, these fake helmets triggered the same mind-bending experiences as the original. Leon had tested them himself and found that, late at night, especially around 3 in the morning, something uncanny indeed occurred. He chalked it up to the mind's readiness to believe in the hush of early morning, but the effect was real enough. People reported sensing a presence to their left or to their right, sometimes described as menacing, sometimes comforting. In those early days, after a wave of visitors left the Infinite Arcade proclaiming they had touched the divine or discovered glimpses of cosmic truth, the broader public began to take notice. News outlets spread the word, and that was how Aurora found them. Aurora had been a traveling vlogger who drifted between pockets of mystical subcultures, burning incense in the redwood forests with New Age shamans, filming meditations in the painted desert, reviewing places rumored to be spiritual vortexes. She was always skeptical, but she thrived on experiencing the inexplicable. When Aurora caught a whiff of a place that married technology with spiritual experiences, she jumped on the next flight. On her first night at the Infinite Arcade, Leon found her wide-eyed and silent in front of a console featuring the Pathless. She sat there with the controller in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks, as some intangible sense of euphoria overwhelmed her. According to Aurora's later confession, it wasn't the game's visuals or narrative that got her, it was the sensation that something was behind her, guiding her every move. After that, Aurora made it her mission to expose the phenomenon to her 500,000 followers. She loved every second of the spectacle, the swirling colors, the mysterious hum of the helmet room, the hush of hopeful pilgrims who queued for hours just to place the blindfold-like device over their eyes. "I don't care if it's scientifically proven or not," she had said in one of her earliest streams. "All I know is that it's the realest thing I've ever felt. And the best part? Anyone can do it, atheist, agnostic, or believer in the universe." Leon was both grateful and anxious over Aurora's coverage. Her videos brought in an influx of patrons. College students, corporate types, even entire families showed up. Some nights, the line to try on the helmet and play the curated spiritual game snaked around the block. He felt a tingling sense of pride when he saw the immediate success. But he also heard rumors that certain religious institutions were not thrilled. Father Michaels was among the first to make open statements from a major denomination. At a sermon that was well attended one Sunday morning, the older priest cleared his throat, gripped the podium, and began to speak about the Infinite Arcade. "We are not here to condemn the search for transcendence," he'd said, voice firm but measured. "It is the birthright of every human soul to seek the divine. But we must approach these new contraptions with caution. There is a risk of confusion, a conflation of spiritual truth with spectacle. True encounters with God cannot be manufactured by technology." The talk had circulated quickly, fueling both condemnation and interest. And for many younger attendees, who had grown disenchanted with stale church routines, the notion of a place that might deliver an authentic sense of the unseen was compelling. Meanwhile, more extreme voices from other denominations were also popping up. Some took to protest outside the arcade's front door. They carried signs that read "a false path to the spirit. Technology is not holy," and other slogans that darkened Leon's mood whenever he tried to greet them kindly. They hurled phrases like blasphemous illusions. And you can't buy a miracle. At first, Leon endured their protests with forced politeness. This was the price of treading new ground. However, not every religious figure was hostile. Rabbis, imams, and priests of various faiths appeared in the Infinite Arcade by ones and twos, quietly slipping in with open minds, wanting to see for themselves. Some left in stunned, contemplative silence. Others asked Leon questions about electromagnetic fields, the psychological phenomenon known as patterning. Do you think you're unlocking something? Or inventing it? Asked a Tibetan Buddhist monk one day. Leon remembered that moment vividly because it struck him as a question worth exploring. Was all this a gateway into an invisible realm, or was it the mind that conjured these experiences the moment it was given permission? He turned the question over in his head daily. Where better to find an answer than from Kiyomi, a brilliant game developer who was now under contract at the Infinite Arcade, working in a heavily guarded back room to design the world's first fully integrated spiritual experience VR platform. Leon had been introduced to her by a mutual friend. Kiyomi, a quiet, keen observer, was an MIT dropout who'd moved on to develop indie games exploring memory and consciousness. When she first heard about the God helmet and the idea of artificially triggering transcendent states, she was skeptical. But after she experienced it for herself, particularly around midnight in a near-empty arcade, she'd confided in Leon that there was something real, or at least something that feels so real you can't deny it. Now, she was harnessing her knowledge of immersive VR and binaural audio to create a game that, in her words, would make someone feel as though they were stepping into a dimension beyond ordinary perception. One evening, Leon found Kiyomi hunched over lines of code in the back office, her short black hair curled behind her ears, eyes glued to an array of monitors. She was so absorbed in her work that he had to gently tap her shoulder for her to notice him. "This is going to blow people's minds," he said. "I mean, everything I'm hearing so far. Merging the game's environment with the user's real-time brainwave patterns to push them deeper into a sense of presence." He gave a low whistle, equal parts admiration and excitement. She nodded absently and turned away from her terminal. "But we have to handle this carefully. I worry about the ethical side of it. If we can truly manipulate what people see in that fragile state, we have a responsibility to do it in a way that doesn't mess them up." Leon saw the serious look in her eyes and recognized how deeply she cared. Kiyomi didn't want to reduce a spiritual quest to an exploitative spectacle. Leon assured her that they'd keep the user experience safe, though he privately wondered if any technology that could evoke such powerful encounters could truly be controlled. The next night, a series of black SUVs appeared in the front alleyway. Aurora had come to film an overnight special featuring a handful of guests, 2 local pastors, a well-known reporter from a national network, and a social media influencer who specialized in debunking spiritual frauds. The group's intention was to experience the arcade after midnight, when the rumored synergy with Earth's electromagnetic field reached its peak. Leon tried to put on a calm face, but in truth, he was buzzing with nerves. If the group had a transformative time, the Infinite Arcade would go from a niche phenomenon to a cultural tidal wave. If they found it lacking or, worse yet, accused it of being a sham, the backlash could bury him. After midnight, the cameras rolled as Aurora led the group inside. She invited each guest to pick a different spiritual experience station. One took the original God helmet design, an expensive piece of tech that Leon had spent thousands on. Another sat at a console with the pathless loaded up, while wearing headphones feeding soft white noise. A third participant donned an VR headset running Kiyomi's work-in-progress software. The lights in the arcade were lowered to near darkness, leaving only the glow of screens and the neon sign from outside. An ambient drone hummed, courtesy of the overhead speakers that Kiyomi had reprogrammed for layering subtle vibrations. Leon prowled the space, offering assistance, adjusting wires, his heart pounding. The group began their sessions almost simultaneously. At first, there was silence as they adjusted to the darkness and the unusual sensations. Then, one of the pastors, a gray-haired woman wearing the VR headset, let out a gasp. She seemed to move her head side to side, as though seeing something unseen by the rest of them. A flush spread across her cheeks. She whispered, "I feel. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it." But she wouldn't elaborate on what she was experiencing, and the cameras captured only her wide, watery eyes and trembling lips. Nearby, the reporter wore the original helmet. She kept turning to her right, eyebrows raised, a trembling hand in the air as if warding off someone approaching from that side. "It's so strange," she murmured. "I'm feeling something. Behind me, but more strongly to my right. It's like a presence." She shook her head, uncertain. "This is nuts, but it feels menacing somehow." Meanwhile, the second pastor, wearing the cheap homemade version of the helmet, Just a blindfold and white noise, let out a deep sigh of relief. I feel guided, loved. I can't explain it. And I'm just wearing a blindfold with some static noise. How is this happening? Aurora's cameras recorded every hushed word. Kiyomi, hidden in a corner, wrote frantic notes into a small notepad, documenting each reaction, presumably for further fine-tuning. Yet Aurora and her filming crew seemed to focus less on the scientific angle and more on the raw, almost primal emotions that overtook the participants. One after another, the subjects described being confronted with intangible presences, some good, some not. By the time the group ended their sessions, a subtle hush of reverence hung in the air. No one seemed to have the slightest doubt that they had been touched by something beyond their normal realm of experience. When the lights came up and the cameras stopped, the participants huddled in a corner to compare notes. Leon hovered close enough to hear them murmur about the possibility that this could be harnessed for good, spiritual therapy, reconnection with lost faith, helping people break out of personal ruts. Yet the debunker present, a young man with a reputation for flamboyant cynicism, had gone completely pale. He stared at the fake god helmet he had worn, as though it were a cursed idol. "It's obviously suggestion," he muttered. "The mind is looking for patterns. If you're told it might happen, it does. But that doesn't stop it from feeling absolutely real." The tension in his eyes revealed that even he was shaken. "I don't know," he added, forcing a half laugh. "Maybe there's more out there. This feels bigger than me." That same night, Father Michaels arrived at the Infinite Arcade unannounced. He was accompanied by a group of clergy from his parish. Immediately upon entering the main hall, they encountered Aurora and the nighttime film crew. Cameras whirled around, capturing the stunned looks on the priests' faces. An awkward moment of silence followed. Both parties had not expected to run into the other so late. Aurora read the tension and quickly signaled for the cameras to hold. She approached the group with a respectful bow. "We don't want to ambush you," she said calmly. Father Michaels, who stood at the front, nodded and said, "I'm simply here to see for myself." He paused to inspect the rows of humming machines, the walls adorned with kaleidoscopic murals of galaxies, and the array of headgear. "I'd like to understand what all the fuss is about." Leon, wanting to keep the peace, stepped forward. "You're welcome to try any of the setups," he offered. There was a note of genuine hospitality in his voice, tinged with caution. The last thing he wanted was to spark a confrontation. The older priest exchanged glances with his colleagues. "Very well," he said quietly. "We'll try it." Moments later, Father Michaels and his group found themselves sampling the same experiences Aurora's crew had just finished. This time, there were no bright spotlights or intrusive cameras, merely the low glow of the arcade's neon lights. Kiyomi watched from behind her console, adjusting the audio environment to a gentle hum of chanting embedded within the static. Leon stood by the entrance, heart racing, not sure whether to be thrilled or terrified. If one of the world's mainstream denominations came out strongly against them, it could shut the entire venture down. But if they found something meaningful here? He heard a sudden shout. One of the younger priests, wearing the VR system, nearly fell to his knees. His eyes were covered, but tears streaked beneath the visor. His shoulders shook as he experienced something no one else could see. Father Michaels rushed to his side, but the younger man held out a trembling hand, encouraging him to keep distance. It's okay, Father. I think I'm feeling. Oh God, he couldn't form the words. A moment later, he gently removed the VR set, eyes brimming with an emotion that hovered between ecstasy and heartbreak. He looked to Father Michaels, whose expression was grave and uncertain. "I felt something. Or someone. But it's love, I think. Like that kind of love we only talk about in scriptures. I don't understand how a machine can do that." His voice cracked. Father Michaels helped him up, patting the younger man's shoulder. His own face was pale with confusion and awe. Though he tried to remain stoic, Leon noticed how his gaze flickered between the array of technology. It seemed to dawn on him that these devices were either some elaborate psychological trick or a genuine gateway to the intangible. For a priest who had devoted his life to intangible truths, it must have been simultaneously fascinating and alarming to find them in an arcade. In the days that followed, word of the clergy's visits and the nighttime filming session spread like wildfire. Video clips went viral, showing a wide range of reactions: euphoria, shock, rapture, anxiety. The debate in the media escalated. Religious figures were split on whether the experiences were valid or a mere deception that cheapened true spiritual practice. The younger generations, enthralled by the possibility of orchestrated transcendence, flocked to the arcade in droves. Behind the scenes, Leon, Kiyomi, and Aurora began to sense that a larger cultural shift was underway. They noticed small gatherings outside the arcade, late at night, where groups of strangers would exchange stories about glimpses of ghostly guides or angels or protective spirits, all encountered in the headsets. They asked each other if they wanted to form a community, to meet regularly, to explore deeper. Aurora caught wind of half a dozen small spin-off gatherings in various neighborhoods, people setting up the cheap helmet rig in their living rooms, dimming the lights, chanting, or playing spiritual-themed games together. They called themselves the Midnight Seekers, a new subculture hungry for a sense of unity and cosmic wonder. Is it a religion? Leon asked one evening, rubbing his temples as he sat in Kiyomi's cluttered office. Are we accidentally creating a religion here? Kiyomi shrugged, swirling her coffee. I don't know. People have formed entire religious movements around less. These experiences are potent, undeniably so, even if they're just illusions created by the mind or some electromagnetic interplay. People want to share them, give them meaning. It's human nature. It's bigger than we ever planned, Aurora said. She was perched on a stool near the office door, editing her latest vlog on a sleek tablet. You should see my comments section. Atheists, agnostics, devout believers. They're all converging in the same space online, discussing the intangible presences they've met. Some say it's a universal consciousness. Some say it's God, capital G, and a few are arguing it's demonic or manipulative. It's chaos. Even as the old guard in certain religious institutions condemned the infinite arcade, a vibrant new tapestry of spiritual expression was weaving itself around these technologies. People were hungry to explore further, to gather late at night under neon lights, to slip on the God helmets, fake or otherwise, and journey inward. Soon, the lines between real and illusion, technology and mysticism, started to blur. Kiyomi was aware of how precarious it all was. The mind could be fragile. Yet she pressed forward, refining her VR experience with advanced neural scanning. She dreamt of a scenario where dozens of people could link their states of consciousness simultaneously. A multi-user spiritual realm, she confided to Leon, her eyes gleaming with possibility. Imagine if people share the same vision together, a collective transcendence. That might change the world. It was an idea so grand it frightened Leon, but also filled him with exhilaration. The notion of a brand new spiritual movement emerging out of code and electromagnetic illusions was half terrifying, half enthralling. Because with every new wave of interest came people claiming to see invisible beings outside the arcade, or to hear chanting in their dreams, or to sense they were part of something cosmic. Tensions started bubbling up. Another wave of protesters marched by, chanting condemnation. A few news outlets questioned if all this was healthy or if it bred mass hysteria. And in the swirling center of that maelstrom stood Leon, uncertain if he was guiding the infinite arcade or if it was guiding him. In an attempt to quell the rising hysteria, Leon organized a large public demonstration, an open house of sorts. He invited religious leaders, curious skeptics, mental health professionals, and everyday patrons to come see for themselves. The plan was to stage group demonstrations of the faux God helmets side by side with the real ones, and then conclude with a special unveiling of Kiyomi's newly refined VR environment. Aurora broadcast the event live to the world, calling it the Night of Revelation. From the moment the doors opened at 9 p.m., the infinite arcade was packed to capacity. People formed a chaotic queue down the sidewalk. Inside, Leon set up multiple stations, each manned by an arcade staffer or a volunteer. Nervous excitement pulsed through the air. By midnight, the place was thick with tension. Father Michaels and some of his associates stood by, arms folded, while a few more progressive clergy from other denominations mingled with them. A cluster of psychiatrists and neurologists observed with wary curiosity. In the corners, new spiritual seekers in homemade robes or street clothes either prayed or quietly meditated. Camera crews from 3 networks circled, capturing every angle. Kiyomi stood at the center of the main floor, a single VR headset in her hands. Around her, a circle of chairs with matching VR gear waited for willing participants. Thank you all for coming, she called out. Tonight, we'll show you how an environment can be generated in real time, influenced by each participant's emotional state. She offered a respectful nod to the audience. It may be wondrous. Or disorienting. But it will be yours to experience together. Leon felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it, the grand unveiling. Kiyomi called for 6 volunteers to join her in what she nicknamed the shared realm. The 6 seats were filled quickly. Aurora, the debunker influencer, who had come back to see if he could finally uncover the trick, Father Michaels' younger associate, the one who had cried weeks before, and 3 members of the public. Each donned the VR headsets. The crowd hushed. The overhead lights dimmed until the arcade was lit only by the neon glow of swirling galaxies on the walls. A moment passed with no sound except the participants' muffled breathing. Then Kiyomi activated the simulation. Through the monitors linked to each headset, the crowd could glimpse a swirling environment of light and shadow, shaped like shifting fractals. The environment reacted to biometric data, heart rates, sweat levels, subtle head movements. Wisps of digital color formed shapes that almost resembled entities swirling around the participants. The watchers outside the VR environment could only see two-dimensional glimpses, but it was enough to see those shapes converging on each participant's vantage. Inside the simulation, Aurora gasped softly. "I feel like I can sense all of you," she said. Her voice carried through a microphone into the arcade so everyone could hear. "I see shapes. Lights. It's like we're in some cosmic cathedral." From his seat, the debunker influencer muttered, "It's just illusions. It's just illusions." Then he trailed off, voice quavering. "Oh. That's so weird. I see a figure to my right, like a silhouette of a person. But it looks like me?" Father Michael's associate, the young priest, whispered, "I can't even describe this sensation. It's like all of our hearts are beating in unison." Outside the circle, Father Michaels listened, eyes narrowed in cautious awe, arms crossed, but definitely intrigued. Suddenly, a shriek rang out from one of the participants, a woman from the public seats. Her VR feed showed a rapid swirl of dark colors. She clutched at the headset, trembling as if confronted by a nightmare. "Something's here," she hissed, voice unsteady. "Something malevolent." Immediately, Kiyomi shot Leon a concerned look. She typed furiously into the control panel to stabilize the environment, but the swirling fractals continued to mutate. Another participant shouted, "I can see it too. Wait, it's so big, like a massive presence behind me." She ripped off her headset, stumbling to her feet. She nearly collided with Father Michaels, who grabbed her shoulders, trying to calm her. In the chaos, the other participants panicked. Some yanked off their VR gear, breathless. Aurora remained seated for a moment longer, though. She seemed riveted, tears glimmering on her cheeks. "It's changing," she murmured, voice shaky but also filled with a kind of wonder. "I see a light behind that dark shape. There's something telling me not to be afraid." Finally, though, she too removed her headset, blinking under the neon. Her entire body trembled as she tried to reconcile what she'd experienced. The crowd erupted in urgent chatter, some voices rising in excitement, others in fear. Kiyomi hopped down from her control station, running to the woman who had screamed. The woman shivered with aftershock, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," Kiyomi said gently. "It seems the system didn't filter out negative or fearful emotional feedback quickly enough. That fed into the environment." "Are you hurt?" "No," the woman said through a sobbing laugh. "Not physically. But that was intense. It felt so real." Father Michaels's group looked on, half in horror and half in fascination. A few of his colleagues had parted the crowd, murmuring prayers, as though warding off something intangible. And in a corner, the debunker influencer found himself speechless, so rattled by what he'd seen that the usual witty sarcasm refused to come. Then, the real drama began. Outside, a crowd of protesters poured into the alley, shouting heated slogans. They had waited until the midnight unveiling to make their move, brandishing signs about technology defiling the sacred. The tension inside the arcade multiplied tenfold as someone rushed through the doors to warn everyone. Reporters jockeyed for position, cameras pivoting to film. In a moment, the infinite arcade was on the brink of chaos, some visitors anxious to flee, others desperate to watch or participate. The last thing Leon wanted was a riot. He stepped forward, urging calm. "Let's not panic. Everyone, please remain civil." He turned to the staff near the entrance. "Lock the doors if necessary. Keep the protesters out, but don't antagonize them." Outside, the protesters weren't simply chanting. Some were banging on the glass. Accusations of blasphemy or devilry came muffled through the door. Security tried to keep them from forcing their way in. The tension soared. Leon rushed to the front. Through the glass, he spotted an elderly cardinal from a conservative order leading the protest. The cardinal's face was severe, eyes burning with fervor. For a moment, Leon locked eyes with him. He thought he saw pure disdain on the man's lined features. Then, surprisingly, Father Michael stepped up next to Leon. "Let me talk to them," the priest said. "They might listen to one of their own before this escalates." Without waiting for Leon's response, Father Michaels opened the door and stepped into the alley. The cardinal advanced, brandishing a staff topped with a religious symbol, voice rising above the crowd's fervor. "Step aside, Father. This place is a den of illusions and sacrilege. We must tear it down before it spreads more confusion to the faithful. Father Michaels lifted a hand, voice gentle but firm. Your Eminence, please. Have you seen what's happening inside? These people are seeking. They're not defaming God, they're searching for the same spiritual truth we all yearn for. A voice from the protesters retorted, that's blasphemy. They're making a mockery of real spiritual experience. Father Michaels took a breath. I experienced it myself. I've witnessed lives changed, hearts opened, people who never believed in anything awakened to the possibility of the divine. Is that truly blasphemy? Or is it, perhaps, a new path for those who cannot find it in the old ways? The cardinal's face twitched with outrage. Enough. He pointed his staff at Father Michaels. You walk a dangerous line. The air felt charged with the energy of a confrontation that could turn violent. Leon, standing behind Father Michaels, braced himself for the worst. Suddenly, from inside the arcade, Aurora stepped out, her camera phone still live streaming. The watchers at home saw the entire confrontation in real time. Her voice, though trembling slightly, rang out over the tension. If God is real, if the universe has mysteries, who are we to confine it to one method of discovery? Let these people seek. Let them explore. You might be surprised at what you find. The cardinal's supporters pressed forward, but Father Michaels and a few other moderate clergy managed to hold a line, urging peace. The cardinal railed at them about illusions and deceits of the devil. The crowd roared, and for a moment, it seemed a fight might break out. Leon's stomach sank. He was no religious man, but he had never wanted to provoke violence. They were close to a meltdown of the entire phenomenon, the kind that could cause public outcry for shutting them down permanently. Then, a single voice rose above the din. It came from the same younger priest who had cried during the VR demonstration, the one who had felt a love he couldn't describe. He shouted with surprising boldness, "Stop this. Don't you see that we're all reaching for the same light? I felt it in there, call it technology, call it suggestion, call it God. It changed me. I believe the Spirit is with us. Maybe it's just that this new device helps us open our minds and hearts to it. Are we truly so fearful we can't let people approach the mystery from a different angle?" The cardinal tried to speak, but the younger priest continued, tears shining in his eyes. "Let them come. Let them seek. We are not threatened by genuine longing for the divine. We should rejoice that more people are searching." At this impassioned plea, the tension in the alley wavered. The cardinal let his staff drop an inch, as though uncertain. Quiet murmurs ran through the crowd of protesters. Some still glared defiantly, but others lowered their signs. Many onlookers, journalists, passers-by, held their breath, waiting to see which way the momentum would go. Father Michaels placed a hand on the cardinal's staff, gently lowering it further. "The times are changing," he said softly. "You can stand in the way of progress, or you can try to guide it in a responsible direction. But you cannot stop it altogether. People are finding something here. Would you prefer they find it alone, or that we walk with them through it?" Leon didn't know if it was the persuasive words, the dramatic sincerity, or simply the spectacle itself, but something in the cardinal's posture softened. With a final scowl, the old man motioned for the crowd to step back. He did not signal them to disband entirely, but the immediate threat of violence subsided. That night, the demonstration ended in an uneasy standoff. The protesters drifted away, muttering among themselves, perhaps planning their next move. The attendees inside the Infinite Arcade eventually dispersed, too. Yet none of them would forget that moment or the raw emotional power it carried. In the aftermath, Aurora's live stream soared to millions of views, capturing the entire drama. Public opinion split between condemnation and intrigue. But one thing was certain: the Infinite Arcade, God helmets, and spiritual experience games were now in the cultural mainstream. And with that exposure came the seeds of new movements forming. Some saw a chance to unify people of all faiths and none, forging a new type of universal spirituality. Others saw a dangerous cult on the rise. Leon felt the weight of responsibility pulling at him like an anchor. Despite the adrenaline that still thrummed in his veins, he knew there was no going back to simpler times. In the weeks that followed, Kiyomi refined her system further, adding a failsafe that would gracefully dampen overly negative feedback loops. Aurora continued streaming her journeys through newly discovered VR realms. Father Michaels, surprisingly, began encouraging dialogue between the faithful and the techno-seekers, as some news outlets called them, while still cautioning that not all experiences might be benign or healthy if approached recklessly. The younger priest who had found such deep love in the virtual domain became a sort of liaison, bridging conversations between new spiritual seekers and traditional congregations. Leon found himself caught in endless interviews, trying to explain that while the original God helmet might be a sham, The experiences people were having were authentic, at least psychologically, if not metaphysically. It doesn't matter if it's electromagnetic trickery, he insisted. People are changed by it. Their hearts open up. They find hope, or they rediscover a faith they thought was lost. Is that such a bad thing?